also need to look at the requirement, as I think this is core to any business analysis professional in terms of what they do. So they own the requirements, they understand the requirements, the needs, and then they define the requirement, they develop the requirement, they specify, communicate the requirements, and then document the requirements, and then manage the requirements. So everything is pretty much revolving around the requirements. So what really is a requirement? So essentially it means that it's a practically focused need. It's not a wish, it's not a want, it's a need of a specific user segment or user role, with an emphasis on understanding the value added by the said requirement. So essentially that need has to be addressed, and there should be some value that you're trying to offer with your feature or some kind of product functionality. So it should be delivering value, should be satisfying the needs of the users, whether those needs are expressed as in the form of explicit need, or it could be implicit. That's not a problem. But then the point is, we as BA should be eliciting those needs, both explicit and implicit, and then trying to understand how those needs and how those opportunities, sometimes it could be challenges, pain areas, assumptions, constraints, all of those need to be addressed with the proposed solution that we are working on. So that's important. And again, as we discussed all along, these are often presented as a documents. We've seen loads of documents in the waterfall traditional. We've talked about FRS, the functional requirement specification document, BRD, business requirements document. Then we've got MRD, the marketing requirements document. Then SRS, software requirement specification. SS, which is supplementary specification or non-functional requirement specification. So they used to be the kind of, or still some of the projects have them. And then when it comes to the agile context, you've got a totally different mindset. And so the requirements are not really bulky, tons of pages of documents, but they're pretty sleek, and those that could be managed in the form of cards, so which is basically what we call as user stories. So user stories are a powerful technique. Again, we follow in agile to, again, refer to the requirements. So they're managed in the form of backlog. You can prioritize the backlog. You can follow prioritization techniques like Moscow, must have, should have, could have, and won't have now. And then all the requirements are written, and then they get prioritized, they get shuffled and reshuffled depending on their priority and the business technical feasibility. You would then prioritize and then pushed up into the sprint backlog, and that's what could get developed by the team, and then they get delivered at the end of the sprint. So that's how the requirements are managed in the context of agile development projects. So again, when we talk about agile and user stories, we have to be conscious of the 3 C's, which is the card, conversation, confirmation. Very important, because that would actually say that every requirement or user story should be in the So as a user, I should be able to do this so that I can get this benefit. So that's the format of a user story. So it should be as simple as that. Instead of writing 300 pages of document, what you're writing is just one liner. As a user role, I would like to do this so that I get this benefit. As an admin, I would like to add a new user to the system so that I can manage the users better. So that's simple, a user story. Or something like, as a scientist, I would like to create a hypothesis for my research so that I can test the hypothesis during the research. So that's another simple way to write a user story. So it's driven from the point of view of the users. And
conversation is user story.
Conversation is basically, once you have got the card, so the user story is written, and then that is actually being passed across to the team that's shared, that's specified, and that's actually shared and communicated across the team. So the conversation would mean that people are able to refer to this. They would then discuss, the development team amongst developers, or even front-end developers, the back-end, the database developers, and then the middleware, the application, the designers. They all get together. They can understand, okay, if this is the requirement, how are we going to achieve this? Do we have a page now? How can we implement this in terms of a solution? Do we have a page already? Yes, we have. Or we don't have a page, we need to develop it. Do we have a table in the database? We don't have a table now. I think we need to create a new table for the users. So let's create a table. okay, I'll create a table for the users and I'll give you the access to the table. I mention the table. Do we have the data? Yes, the data is in somewhere. I think it's an Excel sheet. So let's try and pull the data and put it in the table that you create newly. Okay, that's so what is happening here is basically some kind of conversation, some interactions amongst the development team to understand how they can implement this user story in the solution. So you're actually enabling the conversations instead of writing loads and loads of documents, like architecture document, high level design, low level design document, then code document. You don't need to write all those documents because agile is slim, agile is lean. So we are encouraging people to be lean on the documents, just enough documentation, but more in terms of actually doing the work. And then doing the, even before you do the work, it's better to actually have a chat, have a conversation amongst the team so that they can understand what is to be done and who is doing what. Okay, yeah, I can do this. I've got the page, I can create, I can share that with you, says the front-end developer. The database developer could actually say, the back-end developer could say, yes, I have got, I've understood this. I'm going to create a table today. I'll share it by tomorrow. I just need to, dump the values from the Excel spreadsheets, the CSV, into this table. Who has got the data? I think, yeah, that I think David has got. He will work with you. So this kind of conversation amongst the team is what is the second C. And the third C is a confirmation. So once you develop this one, so you're actually trying to confirm and check and validate and verify whether this is exactly what is needed. So you're going to go back to the user story and check. So the testers and the QA team, when they're going to look at the product or the prototype or the page or whatever has been developed so far, if they want to test it and see whether it is what it is supposed to be, is it expected, is it delivering in the expected lines and the expected behavior, then they would need to check with the user story. As a scientist, I would like to have this, set up a hypothesis so that I can test this hypothesis during my research. So that's the kind of a thing. So there should be some place for defining the hypothesis. Where's the place? Oh yeah, okay, we've got this page. On the page there is a form. In this form you can actually mention the hypothesis. You can enter, it's a text area, so I can enter this and then I can submit. So when you're submitting it, it should be saved in the database against my name because I'm the scientist, lead scientist in this research. I'm assigned this investigator role. So again, they'll go back and say, is it registered? Is it actually recording that into the table in a database? Is it creating an entry into the database about this research, the research project name, the title, investigator name, and then the specific hypothesis? Is it being stored? Yes, it is being stored. That means it is doing work. And then when I want it, how am I going to view this at a later point of time during my research as to what the hypothesis really was? I would have done it about 6 months ago, but I want to see what is the hypothesis now. So I would need to bring it out to the database and show it to the scientist when I want to. So again, that is a view. So the first time is you're entering the data. So again, going back to the CRUD type, create, read, update, delete. So create is the first one. That is, you're trying to create for the first time. You're adding this hypothesis into the database for the first time. That is a create. The read is whenever you want to view that. What was the hypothesis I want to create for the project? I want to see that. So that's when you actually enter something and then say, give me search or enter the project details. You say, click the button, then that should actually go to the database table, get that hypothesis that you created 5-6 months ago and show it. And that is the read or view. And then if you want to edit that any point of time, you should be able to update it. That's the update. There should be some functionality there to edit that hypothesis, for example. So I click on that edit. I should be able to change that hypothesis at any point of time. And then when I change it and then I save again, that should be updating the information, the data into the table. So that is the update. And then if I want to delete, of course, nowadays there's no point of deleting everything. We've got a soft delete as what we call. But before it used to be hard delete, but nowadays all software applications are having they're not really doing a hard delete because that means you're permanently deleting that instance or that record from your database, which is actually against the regulations, right? So supposing somebody's actually doing this as an audit, as a check, who has entered what kind of thing. So they want to have a track record of everything. So nowadays, almost all the applications have disabled this hard delete. So you can only archive this, for example, but it still keeps a point of that particular data for some time. That again depends on the data protection and then data retention policies and all that. So that's the CRUD type, and this is what will confirm. Again, that's the, when the tester tests this, they'll be able to test it across the entire sequence and the scenarios as to, am I able to see this? Am I able to create it? Am I able to update it? Am I able to delete it? All these different scenarios, different test cases, they should be running through with the functionality, with the product. And then if it all passes the entire test, that means it's actually confirming with the user story, the original user story written as a requirement. So that's the confirmation. Card, conversation, confirmation, the 3 C's. So that's pretty much what we would like to do with the agile. So I think we discussed these during the agile course as well. So user stories and 3 C's and invest principle, the independent and negotiable, valuable, estimatable, sizable, and testable. Invest. Again, that's a kind of a principle to check whether you have your story or requirement is written in a good way, in a proper way. So you need to invest in that particular story, which means that it should be small. It should be small enough. It should be independent enough. It should be testable. It should be estimatable. It should be sizable to a particular level, and then it should be testable by the testers. Invest. So that's again requirement is in the context of agile. In terms of risk, there's another thing that we really are need to be very conscious of, which is the risk factor. So the risks, we discussed this at length in terms of the different modules and different knowledge areas that we've been discussing all along. But when we talk about risk, again, it's the effect of uncertainty on the value of an endeavor or organization in terms of what could potentially happen. It could be positive or negative, but what we need to be conscious of is the aspect of the negative impact that it could potentially have, and what's the probability of that particular event occurring. So depending on the high probability and high impact, that means it's going to have a significant impact, and therefore we should be very conscious of that and how we can prepare ourselves to either accept it or either avoid that or manage it to in terms of having that risk. And that's what potentially we've discussed this in terms of all the risks: the people risk, the business risk, market risk, technology risk. Then, for example, the risk that we're going through now in terms of the lockdown, the impact of the virus on the lives, the work and the personal and the professional lives of people, not just of one country or one economy, but the whole world. And it really did have a huge impact in terms of how we are working, how we're living, how we are, how our habits have changed, how our lifestyles have changed, how our work cultures have changed, how we're trying to relate with people have changed. It's significant. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So again, it's a huge risk, and I hope some people who have at least seen this coming and would have done some kind of analysis in terms of how we could react. But this is definitely a life-changing risk that we're going through in terms of the virus and the lockdowns and all these things. So hopefully this is going to open up quite a few minds and hearts into what we are going to do in the next few years.